This happened about 4 years ago in South Africa. To start, I must mention that I am a serious skeptic when it comes to ghosts or the paranormal. I almost always resort to a practical answer, but in this case, I could find no excuse for what happened. We moved into a new house. The previous tenants were apparently drug addicts, and you could see that some really bad shit happened there. One of the doors had a hole in the middle with a piece of hair sticking to it, like someone's head had been bashed through. Anyway, one afternoon I was home alone watching TV. There was no wind outside. The fan and the air conditioning were off. My hair flicked forward, and then flicked me in the face hard. I looked for my cats, assuming that they were playing with my hair. But they were both outside. Like I said, there was no fan, nothing at all that could have caused that. 2 nights later, my husband and I were watching TV, and we heard what sounded like a shower come on. We both went to have a look, and it turned out it was coming from outside. The front garden was pretty much flooded, with absolutely no water source. No rain, no tap, no water hole, house pipe, gutter, nothing. And only in one patch. A few weeks later again, we were watching TV at night. We heard 3 loud bangs on a window from the back of the house. Being South Africa, we thought, oh shit, an intruder. My husband ran to have a look, and there was no one there. There's no access to the back except for a padlock gate. The walls are very high with electric fencing on top, and my husband was there within a few seconds. There's absolutely no way that someone could have knocked and gotten away over the walls or the gate that quickly. I should also mention that while living in this house, my husband and I fought constantly. We never used to fight before, and we haven't since. Again, a few weeks later, our doorbell rang. We lived in a complex, so I thought maybe some kids were messing around because there was no one there. It rang again, and again, no one there. I went outside, and the complex is in a circle shape, so you can see pretty far down both sides of the road, and there was nobody. The same night, a little later, it went off yet again, and the tune of the bell had changed from a normal ding-dong sound to that of an actual melody of some kind. It was one of the preset songs on the bell, sure, but not the one that we had chosen. I thought, okay, don't panic, it must have a short or something. But it never happened again. We got hold of a lady from our church and had a meeting with her, not at the house. She said without a doubt she could sense that something was going on at home, without me even really getting into it. We then had a priest bless the house, and ever since that day, we didn't experience anything else. Not one thing. Like I said before, I always look for obvious answers, always, but I couldn't explain why these things happened. I promise you, this is 100% true. I was in a class, and we had a special guest speaker from Guinea. He brought a balafon with him. I had read in the book for the class that there were a lot of superstitions and paranormal beliefs in some cultures in Africa. So during the Q&A time, I asked him if he had ever experienced anything paranormal. He then told this story about his family's balafon. He said that his family, as well as other musical families in his village, would place curses on their instruments in order to protect them for generations. His family's balafon had been around for many generations and had a powerful spell put on it. He said the military came one day to take his family's balafon away. He gave a reason for this, but I forgot what it was. He said they loaded it onto their truck and went to start the engine, but the engine wouldn't start. They tried many things to get the engine to start, until finally they took the instrument out of the truck. They then went to start the engine again, and this time it started with no problem. Then they decided to put the balafon back into the truck while the engine was running. As soon as they put it in, the engine gave out. At this point, the military guys got spooked, and they left the ballophone behind with the family. Another story that I heard was from one of my Uber drivers. I believe he said he was from Nigeria, and I had the nerve to ask him if he had ever had any supernatural experiences while living in Africa. I figured there was a good chance, because it seems like there's a strong and ancient magic in Africa, at least based on what I've read in that book I mentioned. He then told me this story about how his family would throw objects into the stream by their house if they wanted to curse another family in their village. He said that these spells would always work, and the other family would always have some misfortune or become ill. I don't know if these guys were just pulling my leg or not because I'm a silly American, but they seemed very serious when they told their stories. I particularly don't think the ballophone player would have told that elaborate story if it had been made up, since that would have been a giant waste of time for the class. It's possible that the ballophone story could be explained by some kind of weight capacity issue with the truck, I suppose. Also, the water curse might be explained because they used water as a drinking source, and the stuff they threw in might have poisoned people downstream. But something tells me that there's more to it. I kind of hope there is. I've been in Africa volunteering and teaching English to students for quite a while. I've been back home in America for about 2 months now. I don't know if this is a dream or real or both, but the following is 100% true. For the past week, I've been having this recurring dream about a creature at least 2 to 3 times. It's tall, about 7 feet. It has long, pointy hands and claws, and its body is wet. Not like dripping wet, but just wet. Its feet are large, and it makes loud stomping noises with each step. Every single dream is the same. I look out my living room window, and it's there. It's facing away from me, toward the middle of the street. But somehow, it senses me, and it turns its head all the way around to stare at me. Its whole body doesn't turn, just the head. It sees me and it lets out this loud screech and runs toward my house. It doesn't run like a normal person or humanoid does. Its body jerks about in an odd, creepy way as it runs toward my home. I run away from the window and I jump in bed. I hear it climbing up my house. I can hear its claws scraping at the house, and then it reaches my living room window. It climbs in without opening the window. I never hear the window sliding open, but somehow it's in my house. My husband is asleep next to me and I'm trying to wake him up, but he doesn't budge. The clock says 3 a.m. That's when I hear the loud thud of its footsteps. It's taking slow steps toward my room. I feel like I can't breathe. I can't move. I'm literally frozen solid in my bed. Then it makes its final steps to the bedroom. I can see this creature standing there looking at me, and then all of a sudden the clock hits 3:01 and I wake up. When I wake up, I am actually awake in real life, and my heart is pounding. I don't know what I'm experiencing. Is this just some creepy dream? Sleep paralysis? I haven't experienced anything like this often, only once that I know of in my life. I don't know if this is a real creature from lore, maybe something that followed me back home from Africa. I don't know if it's trying to hurt me or if it's just my brain being weird. Any input would help though. I need to figure this out, because I am terrified. So this all started at the age of 8. My family moved a lot due to my father's job. So we had just arrived in South Africa. And about a month after arriving there, my parents found a beautiful house, big and magnificent. However, 3 weeks after moving in, I wake up at 3 in the morning. Next thing I knew, I was hearing a man singing. I opened my window to hear him better, and through the leaves, because of course there was a tree so I couldn't see anything, I see an African man wearing a purple boo-boo. He kinda looks like my grandfather, so he didn't scare me at first. However, at one point he stopped singing, and I can feel his eyes piercing through the leaves. I quickly closed my window and put myself under the sheets. Force field, I guess. Right after that, he starts singing again. The melody, I've tried to look for it for years now. It's like it's tattooed on my brain. Anyway, it only happened once whilst in South Africa. I had a lot of other spooky shit happen to me there too, but it's unrelated to this story. This was in 2008. Fast forward to 2015. I'm out at 1 in the morning in my town, just walking and appreciating the silence of the night. At one point, I hear a faint whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind. Nope. The melody starts again, and it seemed like he was singing, standing a couple of meters from me. Except I was on a road, and one side of it had a river. The other side just had an empty space. Just dirt and some grass for about an acre. I remember looking around and could kind of spot him in the corner of my eye, still rocking his purple boo-boo. I panic and I yell at him to stop, but it goes on. I start running to my house. It was about 2 kilometers away. Now I'm no runner, and I have practically no endurance due to anemia, but believe me when I tell you I sprinted for a good 10 minutes. I stopped at about 200 meters from my house, completely exhausted and spitting my lungs out. I felt weird for a moment because I was basically crouching, taking a breath, and it's like everything stopped. I heard him sing again. I took whatever energy I had left to get back to my house. I slept with the lights on for about 2 weeks. Now I'm 19, and I kind of forgot about all of this until 3 weeks ago. It was about 8 o'clock. I went out early to buy some cigarettes, and I was walking back home. As I did, I passed through a park. Lo and behold, he sings again. This time I started thinking that I must have episodes or something, but cars are passing literally a couple of meters from the fence of the park. So this time I keep my cool and tape record it on my phone. Then I try something. I take my headphones and put them on, without music. Although the sound from the outside world is muffled, I can still hear him singing, but muffled just like the sound of my environment. So it's not from my head. I take them off and head back home, checking behind me every so often. Once home, I take my phone and listen to the recording. Blank. Absolutely nothing on the tape. So I just go on with my business. At this point, I didn't give a damn anymore. In and of himself, he doesn't really scare me. Like I said, he reminds me of my grandpa. I'm half French and half African. However, it's just so startling each time. And this damn melody. Sometimes I catch myself singing it. I know that he will come again at some point in the future. But next time, I want to be ready. I don't know how I'm going to do that, but I will. I often have strange things happen to me. This time, it was on my recent trip to Tanzania for a midwifery internship. One weekend that I was there, I went on safari in Ruaha National Park. On the safari itself, it was only the guide and I. However, afterwards I was staying at the Hilltop Lodge in a small hut-like room. It was a peaceful lodge, overlooking Ruaha Valley. One particular night I was there, I fell asleep as usual, but I was awakened to the sound of clicking from heels on a hardwood floor. They were coming toward me. As soon as I opened my eyes, I heard a woman say, "How can you sleep here?" I turned to look to my right because that's where the voice came from. I couldn't see much, but I did see a black shadow right next to me on the edge of the bed. The shadow then fell into my stomach or hip area. At least that's what I felt. I felt the shadow go through me, and I felt the bed compress next to me. Keep in mind, I was alone. I checked the time, and of course it's 3 a.m. I was in Africa, by myself. There wasn't anyone to talk to about what just happened. So I thought, stupidly, that I would reach down where there was an indentation in the bed. I don't really know what I was trying to accomplish. Maybe something was there. Nothing. I was pretty scared. I wanted to turn on the lamp that I had next to the bed, but that didn't happen. All these events happened fairly quickly, within 5 minutes. After I felt around, the strangest thing happened, and all of a sudden my head was back and my eyes had shut. I knew that I was falling asleep. I also knew that I wasn't purposefully trying to get back to sleep. My body began to go numb in a systematic kind of way. First my head, then my chest, and so on. I tried to scream, because I thought maybe the lodge owners would hear me and would be able to help. I was in sheer panic. I managed to whisper scream. That's all I could get out. I screamed 3 times and I realized that it wasn't going to work. I gave up and was propelled into a dream, a nightmare, rather. The black shadow had possessed me and was in my mind, speaking to me. She told me that I could do things with my mind when she was there. I found I could open doors and start fires just by thinking about it. It was cool, but really terrifying. I had to find a way to get her out. She wanted me to do terrible things, and she wanted to consume my soul. I spent a majority of the time trying to figure out what I could do to make this demonic being leave. I knew I could have an exorcism, but I couldn't find a priest to do it. I pleaded with her, begging for my soul, screaming that my life was of value and that there were things that I was meant to accomplish. I would be incapable of said things with this demon possessing me, but it wasn't working. She didn't care. My body was her vessel now. The end tap was an endless search in a sanitarium-type hospital, looking for a different vessel. I thought that maybe if I could find somebody who was brain dead, it would be the best idea, if you can call it that. I don't know how the dream ended because my alarm went off. It was so realistic, and I do believe in the paranormal. It was so real, I had to make sure that I couldn't still do things with my mind once I woke up. I will never forget this experience. I should lead by saying that I tend to lean towards skepticism when it comes to the paranormal. I 100% believe that paranormal entities exist. However, more often than not, I think people psych themselves out, rather than have a genuine paranormal experience. In fact, that's why it's taken me so long to follow up on my situation. I'm reconsidering the weight of the situation now, based on the behaviors of people that have been around this artifact that I have, as well as some of the things that have happened to me while I was looking into it. About 2 years ago, I found myself volunteering at an orphanage in Uganda for 6 months. I decided to go out there as a way to recover from my alcoholism and move forward with my life. While I was in Uganda, I also ended up being involved with getting a primary school started, and I assisted in getting a nonprofit off the ground. I was actually offered the position of operations manager at the nonprofit when I left the country, and the school was named after my friend and I in our honor. The point is, I was working really hard to have a good future, and I had succeeded in my recovery. In my last month in Uganda, a fellow volunteer gave me a gift. It was a Coptic cross that he had picked up in Ethiopia while he was on his way back into Uganda. I thought it was super cool and unique, so I got some string and fashioned it into a necklace to bring back to the States. I think it's important to note that the guy who gave it to me came from Trinidad and Tobago and outspokenly hated Americans. We clashed occasionally, but we both understood that we came from different places and ideas and just agreed to disagree. To be clear though, 90% of the time we were friends and on good terms. The very first peculiar experience happened to me about 6 months after I had gotten back home. I was in line to check out in a grocery store when I saw a man who looked like he was from Africa. It's hard to explain, but when you've been in a place long enough, you can pick up on their demeanor and their clothing and things like that. The man was just walking by when he looked at me, then at my necklace, and then back at me, but this time with a look of absolute terror. At the time I didn't think much of it, but still, it stuck with me. Before my second experience, I had some friends comment on my necklace. I was told that it had some sort of weight to it, and that something about it felt weird. I ended up asking some coworkers about it since I knew some of them were heavy believers in the spirit realm. After I took it out and showed them, nobody was comfortable standing any closer than 5 feet from me. They prayed for me and sent me home with a prayer book, which they claimed would keep me protected. At this point, I began to get paranoid, and I began recounting weird occurrences in my apartment. One example is that my 2-week-long writer's block with my music production suddenly ceased when I moved the necklace out of my studio and into another room. I kept thinking of similar circumstances. The only problem here was that I couldn't quite convince myself that I wasn't just falling victim to my own placebo. I also remember the very distinct feeling of being watched, and I never really felt alone after that. One night, after overcoming my usual nightly restlessness, I fell into the comforts of sleep. The next thing I know, I had started a business in my hometown, a car wash actually. I was showing a friend the place, and I let us all into the office. Everything in my office was neatly placed in its spot, just as it should have been. Suddenly, a man appeared walking past the doorway that exited from the side of the office into a car wash bay. Everything about the man's appearance was average. What was unsettling, though, was that I could tell that he knew I was watching him, even though he wasn't looking at me. It was just a gut feeling. The man disappeared as soon as I got a good look at him. I walked out the door in an attempt to see where he went. The man was nowhere to be seen. I walked back inside the side door of the office, and everything was trashed. I looked over at my friend and said that we needed to get the hell out of there. I led the way out of the front door, and laying on the ground in front of my feet was a horse. The horse was barely alive and was quite clearly in excruciating pain. I noticed it was missing 2 legs, one in the front and one in the rear. It was at that moment I realized I was in a dream, and I felt my subconscious start to panic. When I finally woke up, I was sweating and terrified. Needless to say that sleep was not something I was going to attempt again that night. I was seriously freaked out and decided to look into the possibility of a haunting. A week later, I found myself in the home of a spiritualist. I had made sure to leave the necklace outside to see if she could sense it as a sort of vetting process. I also made a point to be aware not to make any hints toward my experience, and more importantly, that necklace. She had told me that she felt the presence of a demon about me, and that it was not from the necklace that I had left outside. Since I made sure not to mention anything that could lead her to know about that necklace, I trusted her reading. However, I politely left after she gave me an estimate for $200 to solve my problem. I know she needs to pay her bills too, I just didn't quite have that much money at the time. A week and a half later, I went to the office of my friend's pastor's friend. She was a Christian counselor who just so happened to have some expertise in the subject. I'm not a Christian, but I figured that it wasn't really a big deal since not everybody in counseling is a Christian. So, the appointment moved forward and I told her everything that had happened. She responded by doing some forearm muscle tests, which revealed that there were 7 demons in me. She was able to relinquish 6 of them, and then things quickly escalated. Apparently the 7th demon was a tier above most, and can't be renounced with spiritual faith. I admitted that I wasn't a Christian, but leaned toward agnosticism. I didn't think it was a problem because I answered that question in the introduction packet she gave me when I first walked in. Long story short, she berated me for 20 minutes, told me I was going to be stuck with this demon until the day that I'm a devout man of God, shamed me for coming to a Christian counselor without being a Christian, and charged me more than we initially agreed on. I think it's important to note that I don't think this is normal behavior for her. I obviously didn't know her very well, but the shift in her demeanor was huge. I honestly couldn't even recognize her when she got angry. Apparently she's been in business for years, and I can't imagine she would be remotely successful if she went off on every client that was simply looking for help but didn't align with her point of view. I suspect it might have been induced, but nonetheless, I left her office hurt and angry. A week or 2 later, I decided to go out to Haiti to volunteer for disaster relief. I'm in my motel in Miami overnight, with a flight out to Port-au-Prince the next day. That night, I woke up with sleep paralysis. I've read stories about it, and realized it was important to stay calm and wait for the rest of my body to wake up. Suddenly, my legs were thrown out from under me, across the bed. My torso felt like it was being pushed around. The next minute consisted of my body being thrown helplessly around the bed while I quietly prayed with all of my might. When I did, it ended abruptly, and I waited until the sun rose to relax. I ended up missing my first flight the next morning by a fluke. I booked another ticket the following day, but I was given the wrong time of my flight, and I missed that one as well. In the last 6 months, I have lost my jobs, isolated myself from friends. I am practically homeless, and I have had to file for bankruptcy. My ever-so-promising career in music is now gone, and I am ashamed of myself because I never made it out to Haiti. I don't know if there is any merit to paranormal interference. I can chalk up the nightmare to my subconscious thoughts, the sleep paralysis to muscle spasms, and everything else to paranoia. But the unexplainable portions are, well, unexplained. Edit. Yesterday, I drove up to a spot on the mountain that I know pretty well. I crossed 2 creeks and walked a mile into the forest until I found a spot that I could easily recognize. I had the cross wrapped in a cloth that I had drenched in boiled salt water and let dry. I had also cleansed it myself before I left. I dug a small hole by the base of a tree and dropped the cloth-covered cross into the ground. I took out my Bible and read a select verse, prayed for it to leave me alone, and then addressed it directly. I demanded in the name of God that it will not follow me home or bother me anymore, and that it would be staying there. I've come back home, and I've only felt better since. Granted, it's only been a few days, but I've been acting more like myself. My productivity has improved vastly. And most importantly, I don't feel burdened by that feeling of constantly being watched. It looks like that did the trick. Although, if I ever do need to get back the cross, I have the exact coordinates memorized. I'm a pretty rational person. I need to experience things myself to believe them. But I'm still interested in the paranormal because I keep experiencing weird things. It all started when I was a child. I used to have a lot of weird nightmares, but a few stood out more than others, especially this one. A weird-looking figure is following me through the city at night, trying to kill me. But for some reason I can't seem to come near my apartment until a moment when I look at the sky and see a little guy lying and sitting on a half-moon, looking and smiling at me. After that, I'm finally able to come home. One of my other experiences is in a Catholic church or parish that I often went to with my aunt. I can't remember why. My mom is Protestant, so I grew up in this part of Christianity. I was still a kid, not older than 8 years old, and I grew bored because I had no interest in religion. And I'm a hyperactive kid. So I go to the confessional booth. I enter a first time. The other side is empty. Then I go out and re-enter it, and there's a beautiful woman smiling at me in a very caring way. I smile back and go out again to get in again, and it's empty. The doors of the booth made a sound when opening and closing, so I would have heard her when she came in and out. Those experiences do not seem scary. On the contrary, they were kind of peaceful. Then everything changed for the worse. In 2010, I moved to another country, and it had been rough on me. I had trouble making friends, and I was self-conscious because of my weight. So I would always make the most of my vacations when I was back in my native country. In 2013, one night I went to the cinema to watch a horror movie with my friend. Then we got back at my house to sleep. It's midsummer, so it's really warm. Thus I kept my window wide open. We're fast asleep until we hear a big boom, like something crashed into the boxes that I have over my wardrobe. I just scream for my dad because I think that it's a bird or a bat, and I'm scared. But my dad says there's nothing. But by the loud sound and the fact that the box had moved, and that it was a heavy box, the bird or bat would have been unconscious. But anyway, we go back to sleep, and the next morning when we wake up, I have bruises and scratches all over my body. This has never happened before. I don't move very much at all when I'm asleep. Neither does my friend, and both of our nails were really short. She even tried to scratch me again, but it didn't leave the marks. At this point, we were both uncomfortable, so we decided to go sleep at her grandma's house. When we were there, we slept in her great-grandmother's bedroom, and just between the two beds, there was a cross. So again, we fall asleep, and when we wake up, the cross is inclined, and I have even more bruises on my body. Then I go back to my mom in the country that I had moved to. The bruises disappeared maybe 2 to 3 weeks after I arrived. It was from that moment on that my life took another turn for the worse. 2014. As I said, my mom is really religious, so she wanted me to take my communion. I truly didn't want to, and every time I was near a religious place, I would feel discomfort. But I went through my Bible study, so we decided that I would have my communion in Cameroon, where my mom is from. Weird things started to happen to me there. I had to visit a priest prior to the ceremony, and he kept saying that something was following me, and that it didn't seem to want my well-being. But I'm thinking, whatever, I don't believe in any of this. I'm just doing this to make my mom happy. So fast forward to the ceremony. Not even 2 minutes in, I get bored, so my eyes keep on scanning the church, and they keep moving up, so I'm actually looking over the priest's head. I see something that looks like an LED tinsel catching fire, so I started pointing at it. Luckily, they extinguished it quickly. As for the rest of the ceremony, I felt kind of disconnected. Then we came back to Europe, but my anxiety kept getting worse. I couldn't even go to school properly, but nothing too severe. In 2015, I went on a summer vacation at my dad's. Again, I came home with a lot of unexplained bruises. My mom kept thinking that it must be some result of the fact that I was turning vegetarian and I had lost a lot of weight. But the blood tests showed no signs of anything that could explain it. In the summer of 2016, I got my first real boyfriend, and it was in the beginning of my first year of high school. It was pretty calm, but I kept feeling more and more anxious, and I kept distancing myself from others. But it's weird because I should have been happy. I had everything I wanted at that moment. 2 years later, my mental health got worse. I was diagnosed with severe depression. I had a lot of dark thoughts, and the bruises on my body were back. In July of 2018 is when I decided to move back to my native country and try to get healthier. I got into a high school where I made a lot of great friends, and my mental health began to improve. But weird things happened at that house. The first year was okay, but from 2019 on, things just kept happening. In my dad's house, we have 2 bathrooms, one upstairs and one downstairs. I would use the latter, while my dad and stepmom would use the one upstairs. I'm used to waking up at odd times, especially around 3 a.m., so I got downstairs to drink some water, go to the toilet, and then to the bathroom to wash my hands. I made sure to shut off the water correctly and go back to sleep. I am the first one to wake up, and I go to take a shower, but I see that the water is running, which is weird because I know that I shut it off. But at the time, I was like, okay, I was tired. Maybe I didn't shut it off correctly. But it happened a few more times. The one experience that really got to me was this year. I was home alone, and I brushed my teeth, and I made sure to shut the water off. I even double-checked it. I went back to my room, was minding my own business, and that's when I heard the staircase creak. It can't creak without somebody stepping on it, at least not like that. I heard footsteps going downstairs, and the water starts running. Again, I'm home alone, but I was like, screw it, and I went downstairs to shut it off. I was on my way upstairs again when the water starts again. I shut it off again, and I hear footsteps going upstairs. I felt watched the entire night. I almost always had the feeling that I was being watched in that house, especially when I woke up during the night, or when I was downstairs at night. I also had a lot of nightmares where somebody that I knew, but also somebody who scared me when I was younger, or a stranger, depending on the night, were trying to kill me or me and my friends. Another common dream was that the house next to mine was burning. Then I came back to live with my mom in July of 2020. I had the scariest nightmare of my life, although it felt like more than a nightmare. I was attending a wake, something that I would never do, for an uncle from my mom's side that I didn't recognize. But again, there's many people from her side of the family that I don't know, with a cousin. Many people were there remembering good times with him, until an aunt brought up that his teeth were rotten. And then many people started bringing that up. And another uncle and the cousin that I came with said that they knew why, because he told them just before passing away. My cousin said, and I quote, "The reason his teeth were rotten is because he was a cannibal." And that's when I woke up. What's special about this one is that I could actually see myself in this nightmare. I was conscious that it wasn't real. I could feel the tension and uncomfortableness, so I kept telling myself to try to wake up. The night after that, I had another nightmare where somebody was trying to kill me again. There are 2 other nightmares that I have all the time. One, I'm in a car with my friends and the car breaks down, and suddenly there's a car that stops, and a man suggests his help, but he ends up killing us. Well, I wake up before he really does it, but it's obvious what he's going to do. The second time I had that nightmare, I was aware that I had already had it, but there were different friends in the car. I could remember what was going to happen from the last time I had the dream, so I forced myself to wake up. The second dream, it was with a kidnapped little boy that I had tried to help, but instead I became a hostage myself and was almost killed. Again, the second time and onward that I had this nightmare, I remembered that it was a nightmare, and I was trying to wake myself up. When I close my eyes to fall asleep, I see faces. Most of them are very scary, and it makes me uncomfortable. I often see a clown staring at me, I happen to have a phobia of clowns, and it's always the same clown, but there are many faces. Am I just getting myself worked up? Is there something wrong with me? I have no idea what the meaning of any of this is. This happened in around 1954 in Hillbrow, Johannesburg, South Africa. My grandparents lived in Hillbrow at the time after my grandfather returned from the Korean War, flying for the SAAF and finding work in the mines. He loved being a pilot, but with a growing family, he took a job with the mines, paying much, much more. From the beginning, the house they lived in just didn't seem right. Strange things would happen, like blankets being pulled off at night with nobody there. Movement could be seen from the corner of the eye, and my aunt, who was around 3 at the time, would talk to someone standing in the door when my grandmother gave her a bath, someone that only she could see. One morning, everybody was either at school, kindergarten, or at work when my grandmother was getting dressed to go to the shops. She was in her underwear when she saw a nun standing in her room. Her blood froze in her veins when she saw this old nun. Suddenly, at a fast pace, the nun walked toward my grandmother, shouting, "Hurry up! Go! Go! They need you! Go now!" As quickly as she appeared, she was gone. My grandmother was out of her mind with fear and ran outside, struggling to open the locked front door. She managed to run outside and scream in the street. It wasn't until an elderly lady from next door ran outside and covered my grandmother with a jacket that she realized she was still in her underwear. After going back inside the house with the elderly lady accompanying her, she explained what had happened. The neighbor explained to my grandmother that this was foreboding and that something bad was probably going to happen. Her words weren't even out of her mouth before the telephone rang. It was the mines, informing her that my grandfather had been injured in a rock fall underground. He was okay, but taken to the hospital with a broken leg. A lot of strange things would happen to them in the future, especially after they moved to the new-founded gold mining town of Welcome in 1957, my hometown. We used to live in a house in Nairobi, Kenya, in Kerichwa Road. It was an old estate and had been there since like 1936. The owner was super old. My brother had come from university, and like he did every single time that he came, he stayed downstairs in the living room. He would always watch horror movies until really late and catch up with me while my big sister and other brother were always jet-lagged and sleeping. So one night we decided that we would watch It, the movie. I got some crazy nightmares. I even shouted my brother's name for him to come and open the door for me so I could go and use the bathroom. When I went back to sleep, he and I were sleeping in the same place. And that's when I froze for a second. I saw a girl dressed in all white, just lying on my roof, back flat, looking at my brother and I. I was shocked and in utter disbelief. I rubbed my eyes and she disappeared. The same occurrences started happening pretty regularly. I told my brother and he thought it was just banter, until one night he saw it for himself. We told our parents and our siblings, and they got so skeptical that we moved out right away. After a while, our old estate became completely deserted, and I've never bothered to go back there again. Who knows what ghosts might be lurking around the house, waiting for their next victim. In a small town in South Africa named Pilgrim's Rest, ghost stories are ever prominent amongst the locals. One school holiday, I went to visit some family who had an old gable house on the outskirts of town. Being gifted with the ability to speak with the dead, I loved going there. I would sit in the fields or near the old railway as they would show me flashbacks of the town's early days. But that holiday, something terrible was shown to me, terrible to the point that I have never returned to the town. Not because I don't want to, but more because I'm not wanted. I discovered a dark secret of that town, and what I saw left a scar. I was out on my usual night walk through the old children's cemetery, which was established during a plague. Most of the graves remain unmarked, but all the years of deaths say 1886. I loved watching the kids play under the full moon. But then I saw them, the miners. They were walking from a part of the forest that I had been told was off limits. But they looked sad, like they were forgotten. The next day, I went to that part of the forest, and eventually, after about a 2-hour hike, I found the miners again. Approaching slowly, I made them aware that I could see them, and that's when they told me the story of their gruesome death. See, back in those days, witchcraft and curses still scared people, and the founding families had been brainwashed into believing that the reason the plague hit town so hard was because they were mining on sacred ground. But instead of following the right procedures to stop the mining, they just collapsed the mine on top of all 50 miners, claiming that it was an accident, and then proceeding to leave the miners buried under the rubble and erased from history. After I discovered this, things weren't so friendly for me there anymore. Like I said before, I've never been back. Not because I don't want to go, but because I am no longer wanted.